Kathleen Allan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. So you mentioned this a few minutes ago, but where are you right now, Kathleen?
I am actually in St. John's, Newfoundland, where I am working remotely with my choirs in Toronto and London and Winnipeg, but actually doing some in-person music making here in St.
Oh,
John's.
wonderful.
Yeah, I'm conducting the Messiah with the Newfoundland Symphony next week. It's very exciting.
I mean, you're obviously fairly well known in the Vancouver choral scene as a composer and a conductor and a singer. But alarmingly, this is the first time that Intima has ever sung any of your music. So, for our audience who may not be as familiar with you, let's start a bit with you. How did you end up in music? How did you end up
Wow,
here?
I'm so excited that Musica Intima will be performing my work. I actually before I even knew I would ever live in Vancouver, I my parents had Musica Intima CDs, and that I was familiar with, and so it's a real honor. First of all, I came to composing sort of through my piano lessons as a little kid. It was just always something that I did, mostly because I didn't like practicing the music that I was supposed to be practicing. I would rather make up my own stuff, and I hated fingering. I was a terrible student, and would much prefer to just muck around on the piano and use it as a tool for playing after school and making up little ditties. So it kind of was hand in hand with any music that I was doing from a very young age. And then I was fortunate to join the Newfoundland Symphony Youth Choir, which is now called Tsleil-Waututh. And Susan Knight encouraged me to formalize my writing a little bit, and they would sing my work, and so it was just like always something that I did. And the composition program at UBC jumped out at me when I was looking at universities, and then I ended up in Vancouver and was there for a long time, and loved being a part of that choral scene. And it was amazing to me how quickly accessible those communities were to me, just as an 18-year-old who'd never been west of the Rockies, to meet people like Diane Loomer and John Washburn in my first year there, and actually get my works into some of their hands. And so Vancouver really was like the place where I realized what being a composer was, and it was because of that robust choral community that I was able to hear stuff out loud.
Wow. I mean, I think of myself as a singer, and that's about all I can do. I wonder how you conceive of your career when you feel quite drawn to the conducting world and to the composition world, and clearly composition's been with you much longer than conducting. So where do you see yourself on a spectrum of an artist, I guess?
I find I whenever I take that personality test, I end up like almost exactly 50-50 introvert and extrovert. And if I'm in a really intensive period of composing, then I sort of crave a little bit more social interaction. And if I'm in a really intensive period where I'm in front of a group all the time and being really extroverted, or charging myself on all of that energy around me of other people, then I feel the need to kind of retreat and do other kinds of work. So I really do need that balance, I think, and it just works out that way. These days, it is busier as a conductor and as the artistic director of a couple of organizations. It's just a lot, especially in these times. It's a lot of planning and administrating and grant writing, and I actually love all that stuff, and that sort of planning for the future and thinking creatively about programming feels like a creative outlet in a similar way that composing does. Assembling a program of other people's music is is really quite exciting and feels creative. So that's definitely the primary activity these days, and I hope to be able to compose a bit more over the next year or two. I think we might have a bit of a quiet phase where I might be able to do a bit more of that. So I'm looking forward to that.
So you're one person, certainly with a foot in both the early music and new music worlds, right? You're artistic director of an early music ensemble, and then out here you had a very, very new ensemble. why do you think it is that those of us who are drawn to early music also end up in new music and the other way around? What is it about those two worlds that seem to go together so well?
It does seem to be a pretty common pair, hey? Like these people who specialize in both of those worlds and kind of skip over the classical and
Yeah.
romantic. I think there's something about the precision of it, like Baroque music at least is is all about text and about detail and ornament and like the finest point of expression, and then creating larger gestures from those very very detailed um, uh, gestures. And I think minimalism brings back an element of that. It's like in the late 20th century when we have those tiny fragments that build into something is that grows and has its own shape. And then in contemporary music, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint what contemporary music is defined by right now, that or current contemporary music. But I think a lot of composers are really going back to that idea of what does the text want to say, and how can I lift in the choral contemporary choral world, how can I lift this text off the page in a way that will add something to it and move the audience. And that's literally a Baroque term, that moving, like the music of the spheres and the humors of the body, and moving, wanting to actually move your audience physically. I mean, they had these sort of wild ideas about the movements in your body that would happen when you heard certain kinds of chords and rhythms and stuff. So I think there's a movement in choral composition that I'm very happy about and excited about, that is back to the text and is about connecting with an audience, and is a little bit less confined by form and rules.
Well, and it's funny because you've got two ideas there, right? You've got the incredibly emotional aspect, but you've also got the
Mhm.
very constructive aspect, right? You're talking about counter,
Mm.
like as musicians, we're drawn to places where we can find both of those in equal measure, right? And I think that's something that the great works of Bach offer, and I think that's something that like we're doing a piece by Tawny Olson, which I won't try and
Oh, I love Tawny.
she's fantastic, but and
Yeah.
it's this piece for harp and vocal ensemble with an Irish text about cold winter
Is it
tide.
Shalem Doib?
Yeah, duo or something along those lines.
I sang the premiere of that
Oh,
work.
really? Oh, in the Camerata?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a fantastic piece, but it comes to mind when you're talking about these little fragments of word painting. Really, it is word painting, and
Yeah.
it's still going to create an incredibly emotional reaction, or at least that's our goal with it. I don't know what your experience
Yeah.
is like, but
Yeah. A lot of early influence in Tawny's work, I think. Medieval, even kind of harmonies. And yeah, I'm a big fan.
well, okay. So speaking of Tawny, um, I was talking to her the other day, and
Oh,
she mentioned that she had switched to composition when she was in her undergrad at University of Calgary, and the department head took her aside and said, look, when you encounter sexism from your colleagues and from your profs, come to me and I'll deal with it. And she said, really, this is a thing that I need to be aware of. As a second year undergrad, what do you know, right? So I'm curious to talk to you as someone. I found the piece of yours that we're doing. I found on a lovely CD of new Canadian carols, and there are 12 pieces of music on that CD. There are two by women, three by people under the age of 50, um, and nothing against composers over the age of 50. But there's clearly, I wonder how that makes you feel to see your piece in that sort of a context.
yeah. I'm very used to being the only woman or one of very few in my company. In my master's degree at Yale University, in the choral conducting program, they take four students into that program every year, graduate students. And in my year, I was the only non-male, and in the year behind me, there were none. So when I was in my second year, of the eight of us in the cohort, I was the only high voice, first of all, which was a lot of pressure for our little master classes, and the only woman. So it was. I mean, I'm used to it, and I think made me tougher. There's definitely been moments where I've noticed comments that likely would not have been made if I were of another gender. And I have had to learn when to respond and when to persevere. And it's a constant dialogue in my own mind. Is this one of those times where I should speak up and say, you know what, would you have really said that if I was a man? And then there are times where I think it's more productive to simply put my head down and prove that I'm just as good or better. So my general approach is to be as prepared and excellent and confident as I can be, and then uh, leave as few windows of opportunity for that kind of remark as possible. So it is a something that I navigate, but I think the only way forward is for excellent and talented women to support each other and to have success and take away that stigma of, oh, isn't that nice that you must be getting this opportunity because you're a girl,
Yeah.
right? And actually show that they deserve it. So
So you're now the artistic director of a couple organizations.
mhm.
In our roles as leading these arts organizations, what do you think our job is to help further eliminate these systemic issues that have been plaguing since the beginning? Really, like this is not a new,
Yeah,
even though it's given voice now, it's not new.
it's not new, but it's revived or it's reinvigorated or something. Um, as a white woman, it's very important that I acknowledge my privilege and that the obstacles that I may have faced for being female are very small in comparison to other barriers that people face in terms of race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and background and language and so many barriers that I have not had to face, socioeconomic status. Um, so the role of artistic leaders, I think, is to provide as many opportunities to prove to the world that people who come from these backgrounds are equally talented and have actually probably more interesting artistic things to say and bring a really unique perspective to choral music, if that's what we're talking about, or any kind of artistic pursuit, because that stigma that, like, oh, that you're getting this opportunity because X, um, that needs to disappear. And we need to realize that, and that's only going to disappear if people become more familiar with those composers, those performers, those works, and appreciate them for their own merit. So I think it is important when programming to consider diversity and not for the sake of diversity, but to lift up the voices of those artists because they have something really powerful to say.
Well, and I mean, I have to say, as a side note on programming, both your piece and Tawny's piece appear on the program as like me looking through long lists of just music.
But sometimes you don't find them. I mean, I know just from the programming perspective, if you were to ask me to name 50 composers as fast as possible, I could probably do it, but they would definitely be mostly men just because of top of mind, right?
Yep.
And just because of prevalence. It's the availability um, heuristic, I think is what they call it, right? And just because we hear their name all the time. And so sometimes we do have to look for women composers. We have to look for composers of color. We have to look to program trans composers because they might not be right in our line of vision if we don't seek them out. And it's not that we're meeting a quota, it's that we're trying to expand our horizon of familiarity so that we have this richer pool of music to draw from when we're assembling a program.
Yeah.
But we don't ignore those aspects either, because if we ignored them, then status quo is to just program all men.
Right. Tell me about the genesis of I Sing of a Maiden.
So I heard from Donald Hunt at the Christchurch Cathedral in Victoria. They were looking to commission a carol, and I asked if he would be open to basing it on an ancient text. I had been just sort of interested in setting something in Old or Middle English, and and I like that sound world that sort of the medieval, on a very superficial level, the medieval sound world evokes. I think partly because of my roots in Newfoundland and that folky kind of open fifth. So I've always been drawn to that. I think in a similar way that Britain was. A lot of his music incorporates that openness, folky, ancient feeling. So I wanted to try my hand at setting an ancient text. The Easing of a Maiden has been set by a number of composers. So, and I just pitched it to Donald, and he said, sounds great. And then I just had a blast setting it. I came up with this little melody and some drones, and it became really rhythmic, and it's kind of a party
It
piece.
is. It's rollicking.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, the caroling tradition, the lessons and carols that we see, live streamed from King's College, um, is just so stunning. But the carols, before they were interspersed with the lessons, were in bars with pints of beer, and so I kind of wanted to go reach a little further back, and have that like fun holiday cheer. We're all singing like a Christmas carol together, so it should be a bit boisterous.
Okay. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Boisterous
yeah.
performance. Yeah. And then you've layered in another layer into the piece.
Yeah, so the Angelus ad Virginem carol is another, it's a favorite carol of mine. Also really old, and is also sort of Mary focused. The Easing of a Maiden is about, how blessed the mother is to have this happen to her. And it's that amazing, that sort of Magnificat, like sort of mystical feeling. The Angelus ad Virginem I thought of because it fit rhythmically in terms of the little melody that I had come up with as the theme for the piece, in the sort of jig rhythm.
Yeah.
It came to mind, and thematically it worked too. I needed a middle section. I was sort of coming to a point where I felt that I had exhausted some of my possibilities with the musical material I was working with.
Right.
So I needed something else to just sort of shift gears and take a little bit of a turn to the piece, so that it would just have a bit more of a journey, and then we could return at the end, and feel some kind of sense of arrival, like we had been somewhere. So I introduced this little Angelus ad Virginem melody without the text at first, and just sort of have fun in a not really fugue, but kind of contrapuntal
Yeah. Yeah.
way. And it's just another way to make it recognizably Christmassy too, because the melody that I wrote isn't known as a carol.
One of my favorite teachers in Holland would always talk about da capo arias and how you come back to the A again and suddenly you hear it differently because of whatever you just said or whatever you just sang in the B. But I think in your piece, suddenly when we come back to your theme in the beginning, we recognize it, even though it's a new melody for us.
Hmm.
It's something recognizable, and suddenly you're like, oh yeah, that's a carol I heard. It was 2 minutes ago, but it has that same effect. I think like it's
Oh, great!
nostalgia in a way. So,
Thanks. I'm glad.
is there anything you would want our audience to listen for specifically, or?
I think just enjoy it. Like I would say, uh, don't listen too hard. It's meant to be fun. I basically did my best to assemble the pronunciation. I did consult someone who knows more than I do about Middle English, which I think is fun. It adds that ancient
Yeah.
character.
Kathleen Allan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jake.